The X-Men began as a cautious but successful experiment. They launched actors' careers, grossed hundreds of millions of dollars, and seemed like a franchise with limitless potential. But at some point, things went in the wrong direction. Today, I'd like to look back with you at the rise and fall of such an iconic franchise as the X-Men. The X-Men took a long time to make it to the big screen. When Batman exploded onto the scene in the late 80s, Hollywood studios rushed to figure out what other superhero movies they could make. And the X-Men were among the first in line. Even James Cameron showed interest in the project, but none of the concepts involving Arnold Schwarzenegger appealed to him. And after Cameron walked away, the film once again stalled in limbo. After the bankruptcy of Carolco Pictures, the rights ended up at 20th Century Fox, which decided to give the franchise a try. Following a string of late 90s failures, Fox chose to proceed with the smallest possible budget. That budget was locked in very early in production. To increase it, the producers tried to attach a major star. But at the time, most actors were afraid to appear in comic book movies. Mel Gibson, who was approached for the role of Wolverine, demanded $30 million. Even for Gibson, the studio refused to raise the budget by that amount. As a result, the role of Wolverine went to Doug Ray Scott. Since he was considered a rising star at the time, the producers were satisfied. Director Bryan Singer was already actively shooting X-Men. The production schedule was arranged so that Doug Ray Scott would join the shoot about a month after filming began. However, production on Mission Impossible 2 ran long, and Scott had to be replaced. The role was offered to Hugh Jackman, who had auditioned earlier but was initially turned down. The film's budget was $75 million. X-Men was released in July 2000. It debuted at number 1, earning $54 million in its opening weekend. An excellent result. The only film that opened better in 2000 was Mission Impossible 2 starring Tom Cruise. With such a start, X-Men could reasonably expect a much stronger total box office run. However, the film lacked staying power. Mission Impossible 2 eventually grossed $546 million worldwide, while X-Men earned just $297 million. Still, for a $75 million superhero movie, this was a very solid result. Naturally, the studio immediately greenlit a sequel. Unlike the first film, which was tightly controlled by the studio, things were different for X2. A pleased Fox increased the sequel's budget by $50 million. Bryan Singer was granted far more creative freedom. However, the studio was unhappy with the direction he chose and ultimately cut the budget. As a result, several sequences had to be removed. One of them was the backstory of the character Jean Grey. In the end, X2 cost $110 million. The sequel opened with $85 million in its first weekend, but once again, the biggest opening of the year slipped away. That honor went to The Matrix Reloaded. X2 finished its run with $408 million on a $110 million budget. The third film was announced during the first week of the sequel's release, and the third entry in the franchise can already be called truly troubled, largely due to Bryan Singer. Singer wanted to direct Superman. He didn't refuse to make a third X-Men film, but the release would have had to be delayed by at least a year, more likely 2. The studio couldn't afford that, and Singer was so determined to make Superman that he refused both a higher fee and full creative control on X-Men. Ironically, after directing 2 X-Men films, Bryan Singer did end up making Superman Returns with a $270 million budget. It became one of the biggest flops of 2006. Even more ironic, Brett Ratner, who had turned down Superman, ended up directing X-Men: The Last Stand. At the time, Ratner was a respected director, best known for Rush Hour. From there, the problems began. Due to an extended pre-production phase, the film nearly lost Mystique and Cyclops, as the actors were committed to other projects. In the first film, scenes were cut from the script due to budget constraints. In the third film, however, the opposite happened. New, cool-looking scenes were added. The entire production schedule collapsed. Principal photography wrapped just 4 months before release. For a project of this scale, that was nearly catastrophic, and the film's visual quality suffered as a result. The Last Stand opened with $102 million in its first weekend, but once again, bad luck struck. Pirates of the Caribbean: Dead Man's Chest opened alongside it with $135 million. Even so, the opening was strong, and the future looked bright until audience reactions came in. In its second weekend, the film collapsed. With a $210 million budget, The Last Stand grossed $459 million worldwide, the highest total in the series at the time. However, once marketing costs were factored in, the studio still lost money. The fourth film was shelved, After much deliberation, Fox decided it would be better to make a standalone film about the franchise's most popular mutant, Wolverine, believing it could outperform a direct continuation. That project moved forward. Bryan Singer reportedly wanted to return to direct a Hugh Jackman solo film, but insisted on an R rating. The producers, joined by Jackman himself, opposed the idea. Gavin Hood was ultimately hired as director. The main box office issue wasn't the PG-13 rating, it was piracy. The film leaked online before its premiere, and unfinished versions with incomplete visual effects flooded markets worldwide. Opinions on the financial damage varied widely. Some believed the losses were minimal. Others argued Wolverine lost as much as a third of its potential box office. In theaters, the $150 million film earned $373 million. Clearly a disappointment, much like The Last Stand, though not as severe. Then came a soft reboot. First Class was originally planned as a Wolverine-style solo film, this time centered on Magneto. Those plans were derailed by Wolverine's underwhelming performance at the box office. Initially, the Magneto solo film was to be directed by Zach Penn, who had written The Last Stand and Elektra. When Fox scrapped the Magneto solo idea and reworked it into another X-Men movie, Penn was also removed. Matthew Vaughn was brought in instead. Vaughn wanted a full reboot, cutting ties with the past, but the studio wouldn't allow it. The film went into production regardless. At the box office, the $160 million film earned just $352 million. Less than Wolverine, even with all its piracy issues. Only the original X-Men film earned less, and it cost more than half as much. Unsurprisingly, Fox once again changed course. Suddenly, Wolverine didn't look so bad after all. In 2012, The Wolverine entered production. The main series wasn't abandoned, however. Bryan Singer returned and introduced time travel and the original cast. That resulted in X-Men: Days of Future Past. But before it, the second Wolverine film was released. The first Wolverine cost $150 million. The second had a budget of just $120 million. Released worldwide in 2013, it grossed $414 million. This was Fox's best result since X2. Days of Future Past, released a year later, proved the franchise could still compete with the biggest superhero films. It grossed $746 million on a $200 million budget. At one point, Fox even considered integrating the Fantastic Four into the X-Men universe. They didn't do it in the first film, but planned a crossover after the massive success. That success went to everyone's head. Fox gave itself just a couple of years to produce the next X-Men film. Apocalypse was meant to be the first entry where the old guard would gradually be replaced by younger characters. Test screenings were disastrous. Reshoots followed. Hugh Jackman was added during them, but it didn't help much. The film was re-edited multiple times under extreme time pressure as the studio refused to delay the release. As a result, Apocalypse became a major disappointment. Not a complete box office failure, but a sharp drop compared to Days of Future Past. With a $178 million budget, it grossed $543 million. After that, Fox decided to make a third Wolverine solo film, Logan. It's often said that Logan's R rating was approved only after the first Deadpool became a massive hit. If you look at the release date of Deadpool and the start of Logan's production, only a few months separate them. Officially, the producer stated that Deadpool had no influence on Logan, and that the R rating was approved beforehand. That may be true, but if Deadpool had failed, that rating would have disappeared instantly. At the box office, Logan performed exceptionally well. With a $97 million budget, it earned $619 million worldwide, the best budget-to-gross ratio in the entire series. Dark Phoenix was meant to close the chapter on the old characters, as cheaply as possible. Simon Kinberg, a relatively low-budget director, was hired. It was his feature directorial debut, and he also wrote the script. The planned budget was $120 to $130 million. Filming wrapped in October 2017, with a planned release in spring 2018. After disastrous test screenings, the film was sent for reshoots and delayed to late 2018. That wasn't the end. It was later pushed to early 2019. More test screenings followed, and they were even worse. More reshoots. They achieved nothing except inflating the budget and causing yet another delay. The release moved from November 2019 to June of the same year. The film was heavily cut and finally released, and where it failed. After all the reshoots, Dark Phoenix's budget ballooned to $200 million. It grossed just $252 million, the worst result in the franchise's history. Then came The New Mutants. Directed by Josh Boone, the film performed so badly at test screenings that it was deemed unfit for theatrical release and sent for reshoots. Then the Disney-Fox deal happened. Fox became part of Disney. The reshoots were attempted multiple times and never happened. Originally, the film was planned as a streaming release, but as theaters began reopening in late 2020, The Mutants finally reached cinemas. With a $67 million budget, The New Mutants earned just $49 million. That's how the story of Fox's X-Men ended, with failure, loss of direction, and complete brand burnout. But one character survived that collapse, and through him, the X-Men were given a chance at a second life. Wolverine remained the only character who continued to hold audience interest even after the franchise's downfall. Deadpool and Wolverine confirmed this. With a production budget of around $200 million, the film grossed over $1.3 billion worldwide, becoming the highest-grossing entry in the Mutant franchise. Thus, Fox's X-Men saga was officially closed, and through Wolverine, the franchise gained a chance to start over from a clean slate. Whether the X-Men will receive a full continuation remains an open question. Marvel is clearly in no rush, preferring to reflect on past mistakes and determine how to properly bring mutants back to the screen. And that was the story of the rise and fall of the X-Men franchise. Thank you for watching, and stay tuned.